What does the poverty mentality really look like? Whenever we use the word poverty, we oftentimes associate that with finances. However, today we're going to be looking at this in a broader context and really examining how we as fallen creatures, our souls are rather depraved, and we get into a lot of poor and pitiful situations, and that's a result of our own psychology. So today, here at Kingdom of the Logos, we're going to be looking at a work that has been put together by Pastor Mike Proctor, who is not here today, but myself, Pastor Jalen Proctor, and the one other with me in the studio,
Pastor Amanda Sparrow.
We're going to be examining this, kind of having a conversation on it, so thank you for joining us. I want to begin, before we pray, by actually going to Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9, which says, "Two things I require of thee, and deny me them not before I die." And of course, this comes from Augur, who is the writer there in Proverbs 30, and he's making a question for God. He's praying to God and all of this thing. "Two things I ask you before I die." Verse 8, "Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me. If I am full, I will deny you and say, who is the Lord? If I am poor, I will steal and take the name of my God in vain." And you know what? That proverb doesn't exactly have to do with what we're going to talk about. It may. But I really love Proverbs 30, and I love that particular statement. Augur sets up a lot of interesting dichotomies, and I love how he sets up this thought here that actually if you're kind of at the top of life, you will forget who is God, and if you're sometimes at the bottom of life, you'll steal and you'll try to justify yourself. An interesting thing. But Pastor Amanda, would you pray for us as we begin?
Sure. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity and time to come and to talk and learn more about you. We pray that you would give us your wisdom and your peace, and may everything we do be for you and for your kingdom. We ask this in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. And as we're getting started, we've been having some fun cases and conversations behind the scene. Now I'm getting crazy. We were talking about people that, is there any serious snake handling in the world? How serious is that? Is this just a construct of things for people to kind of poke fun at within the church? Because on a regular Sunday, you might have your people who are helpful in preparing the sacraments. They help prepare the Lord's table and communion. Do people do that in a snake handling church?
I would guess somebody would have to, right?
Is that a practical problem people have? Like, somebody's got to get the snakes ready, like at 9 a.m. And if the snake people aren't there, you've got Adam and, he's in charge of the snakes. But if he's not here at 9 a.m., somebody else has to get in there and get the snakes ready.
Yeah, does everyone have access to the snakes, or are they is there someone who has a special key to that room?
See, because again, like with the sacraments, it's meant to be holy.
Yeah.
You don't want this to be treated lightly. Is there like a version of transubstantiation? When does receiving communion not just become the wafer and the grape juice or the wine and the bread? When does the snake become a serious element of the ritual?
So the snake handler, if he's dealing with them on a random Tuesday and he gets bit, is that okay? But if he does it on Sunday morning between service time, then it's a test of his faith.
Right. These are serious questions. I would be interested. It would be very entertaining to read the serious theology around snake handling.
At least to figure out, the pragmatics of it, because it's one thing to say, if a snake slithered past you, but that to be actually part of your formal worship.
Yeah. The snakes get antsy, man. We had some guest singers, and they did 14 songs instead of 9. Them bad boys are needing out.
They're thawing out.
They're falling out. Okay, let's get to our serious conversation though. So, Pastor Mike has put together this work, and I've got it where we can pull it up and read along with it. Mm-hmm. And he begins by saying, "The state of mind of the poverty of the soul is more a way of life and thinking." And I think this is something which is true. We're just going to break this down as we unfold it. Okay. The mentality of poverty in the soul, and even this does turn over into material poverty. You do see, unfortunately, people create habits. They create systems in life. I mean, this is something which is true from Galatians. A lot of times we read Galatians 6:7, which says, "God will not be mocked. Whatever for a man might sow, that he shall also reap." But then the verse after that, Galatians 6:8, goes on to say, "You sow things of the flesh, you will reap the destruction of the flesh. You sow things of the Spirit, you will reap eternal life." whenever our mind is stuck in a broken state, and we sow that, we repeat that, that will translate into the world around us. Mm-hmm. Again, this is also something you find in James. Like a sin pops into your mind as a temptation, but then it kind of conceives, and once it gives birth into the full sin, then, the result is death. It goes through that process. And the state of poverty of the soul is a serious problem because I think in our modern day and age, we always talk about how there's a failure to launch among young people. I'm a millennial. I guess, Amanda, you're a millennial too. We're the same age, basically. There's this talk about how with the millennial generation, starting there's really this failure to launch that we have in, say, modern America. But I think it's worse than that. I'm not saying the failure to launch isn't there, but we also have nowhere to land. A big problem, what are people going to find meaning in life? As much as we joke about Netflix and chill, the popular shows that have come out like Stranger Things, these aren't things to live for. They're not anything worth dying for. Mm-hmm. You should go out and watch a movie, whether it be The Lion King, you play a video game. These are things that you do as an escape from life, but they shouldn't be the things which give you life. Yeah. And we've taken people away from the basics of meaning. And I think that's a serious problem. And I think this conversation of poverty can tie into that. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add there, Amanda.
Well, I think, like you're saying, where to land, I was reading something fairly recently that talked about one of the reasons things like social media and entertainment venues have become so popular it's that escapism has kind of run the course. Instead of being something you do for a moment, it is something that has consumed people's life because the real world has become so chaotic. And there's a lot of things that feed into that, and some of them are very legitimate, I think, critiques of the world that we live in. And so we're trying to find somewhere to be and to exist and to be, human, to be accepted and loved and to participate in a life. But oftentimes it is a bit of a half-life than it is something that's true. And so, so this mentality, though, of the poverty is where I think we're trying, we don't know what we have. So we're trying to create something, and oftentimes it can be lesser than what's really happening around us.
Sure. And what you're saying basically sounds like Oscar Wilde, which is, he made a statement in the 1800s that says, art used to reflect reality, and then reality started reflecting art. And then eventually reality only found its purpose in imitating the art. And I think he actually said it differently. He said art began reflecting life, then life began reflecting art, then life found its only meaning in the art. Basically, we've done that in the modern day and age. You basically just described that. It made me think of that line from Oscar Wilde. Anyways, so continuing on with what Pastor Mike here has here, he says, although the use of the word poverty is often associated with finances, however, its use in this context has more to do with behavior than it does financial luxuries. All the more, one could be living in the state of poverty from any financial stability. And again, that goes back to what we're saying. You can live a life without meaning in any station of life. Mm-hmm. Again, this is why I say people actually need salvation from sin more than they need a social program. Because you can have people on paper. You've got a nice house. You live in a mansion. You've got multiple mansions. And how many times have we heard versions of this story? You're a celebrity and you're very famous, but yet your life is overrun with drugs. You're miserable. You're not even really awake in the sense that you're conscious and in control of your facilities. You're kind of just going from one hit to the other. And those stories often end up suicidal or an overdose. How many times do we hear that? Right?
I mean, that's why we have so many TV stations that focus on the news on celebrities, because there's enough material to mine out of there. But yes, the emptiness and the void that comes within that even what we would consider some very financially secure people.
I mean, even what you just described there are people who find meaning in the unmeaning of other people. There's a whole industry of just following how broken celebrities are, where people who are they're not celebrities, they're kind of the common person, their life is without meaning. So they find a false meaning in looking at the false meaning of the celebrities, and it's a vicious cycle of nothingness. So yes.
It's like have you seen that picture where it's a cube of mirrors, but like the mirrors are turned on each other, and so they were able to get the camera out of the shot, so you just see this infinite reflection of
no.
nothingness.
Yeah.
That's basically what this is, because it's like I have nothing and you have nothing, so I'll look at your nothing to find nothing, and then you just keep going.
It is a huge problem. We have, going back to Galatians 6:7, not only is that a warning, it's also a pathway out. We've got to actually till the land. You can't stop evil from happening. We don't have the power to do that here in a fallen world, but we can till the land. We get your life together with Jesus. That's what Matthew 7 is all about. When it talks about, get the log out of your eye, that's not meant to depress you. It's meant to tell you, get your life together with Jesus and do what we can to actually create a meaningful society where people have somewhere to land. And they're not just trapped in this mentality that Pastor Mike is writing about. And we haven't even got to any of his points. We're just reading his preamble here. Okay, let's get to this. He says, so here are the symptoms of this poverty that prohibits the abundance of life for which God has created us. Number one is a focus on the self. This might be described as selfishness, but it goes even beyond selfishness to entitlement. Yet this is a false sense of superiority over others. Now, I want to begin. I'm actually going to take a different angle on this before we move on to number two. But I want to begin by saying the entitlement problem we have in the modern day and age isn't just an entitlement to things, but an entitlement from things. And the big problem that you find with a lot of people in society, this is especially true with celebrities and all of us, actually, it's true of every son of Adam, daughter of Eve, who is a sinner, is that we think that we are entitled from criticism. And by that I mean, I don't need your discipline. I just get to write you off as rude or cruel. And the devil has done a good job of making us think our enemies are the people who should be our friends and the people who may genuinely want to help us. We think they're our enemies. And the people who are feeding us flattery, which actually keeps us immature, keeps us in, spiritual diapers, those are the things which should be confronted, but because they feel nice, we think they're our friends. And we think that we're not just entitled to the things that we do want, but we're entitled away from the things that we don't want. Generally the things we don't want to hear. But that's just my initial take on it. Pastor Amanda, what do you think about this? This whole focus on self.
Yeah, well, I think what's funny is I was flipping in the Bible to the passage of Galatians, and before we get to the do not be deceived, Paul writes to them, all must test their own work. Then that work, rather than their neighbor's work, will become a cause for pride, for all must carry their own loads. And I know that we can get into that passage in some weird social places, but I think where Paul is telling them, and then he does go on to do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked, is your life will be tested. Like, you cannot get exempt from judgment. And so what you can do, though, again, like you referenced the Matthew text about the plank in your own eye, not as a depressant, but something to encourage you towards something better. Paul is not writing us to scare us about judgment, but to say this is happening so you can prepare for this. And you can actually find yourself judged rightly. Like, you are not left to just be condemned worms in the scope of the world. Instead, you can actually be quite victorious in this world.
Sure.
But you're going to have to then start testing what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it.
Absolutely. So another angle to this before we move on is that when the focus on self, we generally think of this in terms of raw selfishness, but I think another angle to this is that you can't see or empathize beyond someone else's perspective. Like, it's not that I'm being willfully selfish when I come into a store and think everything's about me. Like, everybody should go along with what I want. Or I come into church and, I'm the preacher. I preach from the pulpit. It should be convenient for me to come into church, have my parking spot, go inside, and I've got to get the sermon ready. I've got to, get the music ready. And I don't want anybody to bother me with the issues with the toilet right now. I'm the pastor. I got to go up here. There's an inability to see beyond yourself. And guess what? If the pastor comes in there and say somebody does want to talk to you on Sunday, which happens almost every week, if I'm not interested in talking to that person, I've missed the purpose of why we have a church. Now, I'm very strict. We do get things together, and we start on time. We don't do the whole Nazarene time is 15 minutes late. I was told that growing up. I've learned that's actually not true. I like to start on time.
Yeah.
So we're actually very timely here. But at the same time, when people come to me, 15, 20 minutes before service, I make time to give a few minutes with them because I don't miss the plot. But I think a part of the poverty mentality that Pastor Mike is tapping onto is I only see things from my perspective. Why do I care about your problem right now when I'm the pastor at Sunday morning? I'm supposed to go up here and get these things ready. I think sometimes we take things too far where we say, this is my niche. My niche is, yes, I pastor, but I also play, the piano and the saxophone. If you want to ask a question about, playing the guitar, go over there and talk to, like Melinda and Adam. Like, go over there and talk to them. They're the ones who do those instruments. Like, we have this idea where I've got my niche and I can't imagine anything beyond that. Like, I can't even be bothered to think that the ladies that clean, or, the groundskeeper who keeps the grounds outside, that what they have going on is important, and they may need my help, and I may need to invest in them. I think there's an inability to empathize that's part of this too. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, and I think like you were saying, it's not always intentional.
Yeah,
it's not like we see option A, option B, and I'm going to pick option B. It's something we're going through life. We're doing what we want to do. I had one day I was doing some errands and I almost got hit by at least 2 cars, and then when I got into the store to do the errands, almost 3 people ran into me with their carts, and I was just like, am I invisible today? Like, what is going on? And sure enough, I don't think anyone saw me and said, I'm going to hit this person with my cart or my car. But if they had hit me with their car or their cart, the result would have been the same. It still would have been quite destructive or hurtful. Although shopping cart's not too bad, but still not the best. But my point being is, so even when we are unintentional in how we sometimes ignore the situations around us or don't empathize with the situations around us, we do have to recognize that they can still cause harm, even if it's unintentional. And I think the job for all of us then is to recognize that mentality when it comes up. And so whether it's like an interruption at church, we go, okay, I need to address this. Maybe now, like 2 minutes before church starts isn't the best time, but I need to write myself a note, get somebody else to help me remember. So this can be addressed, and we're not just going through, like you said, missing the plot of what it actually means to come and to gather as the body of Christ. And I think that's, oftentimes other people become a very helpful means of grace to us because they can remind us it's not just us.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And you began by saying sometimes it's not even intentional. And I think that's a huge part to how this mentality works, is they're not even aware that they're not empathetic with others. And again, I say this all the time. I think this is also a product of how much our culture has broke the 5th commandment. A lot of times if kids if they don't know their dad, a lot of times they don't have confidence. When they don't know their mom, they don't know how to empathize. Like these are real problems. When small children don't have a mom, they don't learn the empathy in the way that they should. Now, again, both kids, you need both your parents all throughout life. But as you develop, there are different stages where different things influence you and impact you. It's very hard to get away from the design that God has given us. And our families are so broken in the modern age. I think. And again, part of this is we've encouraged, moms to not be with their children, but to, go out and work. I think we've done a lot of things that have been very destructive, but we haven't actually had the beautiful gift of parenting model the empathy for children in the way that it should be. I think our society is broken in so many ways where a lot of people aren't taught empathy in the way that they should. So much of our personalities are modeled on the television by fake people or fake stories, fake representations of people. Yeah, there's real actors there, but the characters aren't real. We're modeling our personalities on fake things rather than real things. All right, number 2 we've got here, a false sense of work ethic. This is not always the case, but it seems to be that the enemy called Satan, the slanderer, the devil, the evil one, has convinced them that their work ethic is superior to others. This does give way to a false pride. All right, so this actually, Pastor Mike says it's not always the case. I kind of think it is. And I'm going to expand this a little bit to the false sense of work ethic. I think it can also mean a false sense of knowledge, how smart someone may think they are on a subject. And I've seen this in a lot of areas. I've seen it in construction work. I've seen it in music. And we all can probably imagine this. People who say they're really talented at something, but then they're really not. If you're a musician at Jolton, close your ears now. I don't want you to get over prideful. Currently, we can all imagine the eccentric musician who thinks they're the best at whatever instrument it is they play. And they may not be. Currently, we've got someone who's a musician here at church who is the most fun other musician I've ever played with and is also the most talented person I've ever played with. And they don't have a like overpowering personality. They're not someone who comes into a room and is like, everybody look at me, give me all the attention. And sometimes, again, to this mentality, you'll have someone who comes in the room and says, I am the best musician. And they're kind of awful. They actually don't know almost anything. But they have that sort of aroma that they carry with them. And I've seen it also back, obviously I do a ton of hands-on manual labor around the church, whether it be, building, residential construction or whatnot. I'm always doing stuff like that. And I know a lot of people who are like, yeah, I know how to do that, but then they really don't. And what's so sad is because this sets people up to have bad, it puts you in an awkward, uncomfortable place with other people. But I've seen this, and I've seen it in just about every aspect and sector of life. And sometimes it's people saying, I know a lot about this subject. So maybe it's not their work ethic in the sense of how they would do at work, but they say, oh yeah, I know all about that. I know all about that book. Yeah, I've read that. Then when you sit down with them, you're like, I don't think you've done anything but see the title. And it's really embarrassing. It's embarrassing to kind of interact with that as much as it's embarrassing to be that person.
Yeah. Well, and I think you were talking about musicians. I know in several churches that I grew up, it seemed to be predominantly piano players, but we're not going to just pick on them. But that were actually legitimately really great piano players. And some of them were even paid professionally pianists. And I mean, not just by the church, but like they were part of phenomenal works of music. But the problem was, if you don't show up to practice and you don't know what's going on, and you may be the best there is, but if you don't know how to play with the rest of the orchestra,
right?
What's the point? And so this mentality that comes in any place, regardless of your skill, but I do agree with you. Sometimes the people that are tooting their horn the loudest are also the most deficient. It's an overcompensation.
Sure, yeah.
But even if you really are the greatest, you really think you're going to get there on your own?
Yeah.
And there is something quite phenomenal to recognize our place within, to continue the analogy, within the orchestra. So even if you are first chair, good for you. But no one came just to see one person play. Like, we've come to hear and to listen to the whole orchestra. And again, this is where community helps us to realize who we are in the midst of all this. And not that we can't, but yeah, the poverty mentality I think that Pastor Mike is talking about is there begins to be some very recognizable signs that you are operating out of a myth of scarcity. And so you have to hoard even your intellectual abilities and your skills, because in order to protect yourself, you have to hoard those things. You have to keep them to you, and you have to assert your dominance over everyone else who would claim to take that away from you.
So I'm going to share two stories real quick to this end. I know a particular guy who's my age. I almost called him a young man. I'm really a 50-year-old in a 30-year-old's body. A lot of kids at church think I'm older than I am. I'm 30. But I know someone who's my age, and he has a hard time keeping a job. And the reason why, one, his father was not invested in him in life. He only met his father one time, and his father didn't even have any interest in him. His father was tragically on drugs at that time. And doing them in front of his kid, even though his young child didn't understand what was going on. It wasn't until he was older that he could look back and be like, oh my goodness, that's what dad was doing. But he got in trouble as a teenager. And again, we talk about failure to launch. There's nowhere to land. If you haven't had your dad invest in you, if you've been set up like this, you don't have anywhere to land other than a life of, destitution. And he got involved in some crime and things and ended up going to prison. And you know what? These things happen. We make mistakes. And he came to Jesus while there and came out and has legitimately stayed out of, a lot of really bad circles. And I don't think anything wrong of people that have done that. You were given a very bad hand. And a real problem now is in his developmental years, being in prison, when a lot of people learn to make decisions for themselves, those were taken away. And now he has a hard time. He's actually a very skilled person, but he has a hard time keeping a job because he has a hard time initiating a lot of the stuff that needs to be done when working. And now is a guy that has a really, really good heart. But there's a real side of him that's got to be confronted, where the real man in him has to be awakened. And I've seen a lot of maturing going on there. There's still a lot more maturity to be done. But the poverty mentality can come on someone like that. And again, I am being confrontational. I am talking about a specific story, and I'm going there because these are the real situations. We know people like this in life, and sometimes we are people like this in life. Mm-hmm. I'm a 30-year-old man. I may not have lived in all of the sins and vices that other people have, but I've lived in my versions of them. I'm a sinner who needs to be saved. It's easy to want to not to wake up in the morning and go out and do the things that you want to do. A big problem among pastors today is it's embarrassing a lot of times to confront other people's problems. We are uncomfortable talking about it, so we don't. Okay? This is not a criticism of the people. This is an invitation that we all have to get up. And so we've got to talk about what's really going on in life, not doing theoretical Christianity, so we can help and love one another. But a real problem, and he's not the only young man who I've seen this happen with, is that you have a work ethic, but it's been broken in how you apply that to the world. And that keeps you in the poverty mentality. And you've got to learn to overcome it. You've got to come to Jesus. This is why Psalm 27 is so important, because a lot of this goes back to the fifth commandment. The fifth commandment is really about how the generations pass down. It's about your bloodline. It's about you being made in the image of God, but you also, to a much smaller degree, reflect your parents. You look in the mirror, you see your parents. If your parents did not invest in you, you think that there's something broken with you. That's a real problem. People have to get over that, and the only way to do that, the only way to repair, this is a wound that is not repairable by human hands. It's only repairable with God. There's a reason why Psalm 27 says, when my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up. You have to come to God. When your dad did not invest in you, you have to come to God the Father and say, be my father. Help me learn this initiative. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard, and you're going to have to surround yourself with people to help you to do that. But that's the only way you can get out of the poverty mentality in that case, because you might have a real work ethic. You might have a ton of talents that God has given you, but the world has dealt you a hand that keeps you from using them. The other story I want to share, we've all seen people do this in all sorts of walks of life. They're what Amanda said, someone who's actually talented, but they're so skilled that they don't think they need to be kind of involved in the other ongoing. So say you've got a church play going on. I'm a really talented piano player, so I don't need to come to choir practice. Well, when it comes time for the play to be put on, you're utterly unfamiliar with the program, and so maybe you start songs at the wrong time, or you do things out of order, and it just embarrasses and infuriates everybody else involved, who has worked hard, who sacrificed their time. And that's not fair to them. But we've seen situations like that where it's actually your abundance of skill that now keeps you from being fruitful and abundant and multiplying. So the story I wanted to share with that, when I worked at USS, there's a guy that worked with us. So this is a foundation repair company. He was actually an all right worker, but didn't like work. He was actually capable of quite a bit. He was young, which in doing foundation work, means you're flexible and you can actually crawl around in crawl spaces. But when he was outside, he would say, it's hot, and I don't like working when it's hot. And he would give an excuse, even though he was very capable and pretty good at it. When it was time to get under crawl space, I don't like spiders, and he didn't want to get in the crawl space. Well, one day, this is a little bit of immediate justice. He didn't want to be inside. He didn't want to be outside. So there was also some septic lines that had to be, or there was some outside work that had to be done, and we didn't know it was next to some septic lines. And some places have pressurized septic systems. Just because of the lay of the land. And he's out there, he refused to do the first job, he refused to do the second job, and finally people were like, go over there and just, dig this hole or whatever. And he's got a jackhammer trying to chip off a bit of a sidewalk, and he goes through a pressurized septic line. And it starts blowing septic all over him. And to add to that, there was a hornet's nest in the tree. Like, you can't make this up. There was a real legit, huge hornet's nest in the tree. And they came down here because they got upset about being sprayed by all this, and they just start lighting this dude up.
Oh, no.
And what you saw is you were given places where you could excel. You could have done shave off the side of the foundation. You could have done under the crawl space where it's cool. And you had the talent and skill to do that. But your false sense of pride that I don't want to do it because I don't want to get hot, or I'm too good to get into the crawl space. That's for the other people and their spiders down there. Your false sense of pride ended up covering you in septic and being lit up by hornets. So, real story.
That's awful. I mean, full of karma, but still awful.
Yes.
Yes. Also, how do you get a job in that field and then be like, but I don't like spy? What do you think we're doing here? Like, I'm confused. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But
well, again, a lot of it comes from people are actually skilled in doing this sort of work. But I don't like doing the work. I mean, we're broken creatures. That's what the problem with being depraved is. The other day, I was riding home and I was saying a few words out loud in the car because I was conflicted about the way the words sound. And I thought to myself, because I caught myself doing this, I said, I'm saying these random words out loud, which sound so goofy. And if you're Saint Michael in heaven or Gabriel in heaven, and you're looking down, you're an angel looking down at this creature man that God has made, and you're like, they're just dumb. They're broken and dumb. They do dumb stuff. They'll sit alone in their room and get tempted and just give straight into like some dumb, unhappy temptation. They'll be at work and they'll be the best guy on the job site that can work, and they'll be lazy. There'll be someone who's lazy and pretends like they're the best guy on the job site. These creatures are just dumb. Like, why haven't we smoked them yet, God? Like, you just got to think, like, the angels in heaven, they look down on us and be like, what is this? Okay. Number 3, deceptive humility. Indeed, this is a learned fault, whereas certain words and or phrases are used in order to achieve sympathy for their cause. When perfected, it is even more wrongly used to promote their desires and is a form of the most wicked arrogance because it is cleverly used to manipulate the thoughts of others. And so this is the deceptive humility. And another story I've seen of this, when I was first at Jolton, there was a true villain to the church, someone who wanted to be an enemy to the church, and she has a soul that needs to be saved. I don't say that out of condemnation. I say that of just to honestly categorize the behavior. And she was what another group of people refer to as like an emotional vampire, someone who just wants to leech and cause drama, and is not here for anything sincere, but is only here to manipulate and cause drama. Well, she got suicidal. She had become quite a problem. She was, heckling some Sunday school teachers I had that were college kids, and that they were not at all prepared to be heckled by someone who would come along and say, "You don't really love me. You bought me clothes. You don't really love me." And basically be like Satan out of the book of Job, like, you only did this because God expects you to do this. Like, what can you do with that?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, actually, it is Christian charity. Christian charity says, I can't hate you. I have to love you. And so I am loving you. I'm being merciful to you. I'm a college kid, and I've gone and bought clothes for you, and I'm trying to invite you and teach Sunday school, and now you're heckling me and publicly telling me, in front of other people, you don't love me, or I don't love you, and that it's all just out of, a fake allegiance to Christian charity that I'm doing this. Like, you can't reason with that.
Yeah.
And eventually she gets suicidal, and I realize I have to, as much as I don't like interacting a lot with a lot of government things, I was like, I've got to call Metro Nashville and do a wellness check. Like, I've just got to. So I come over here, and she sits down with this counselor. This lady comes in the church and sitting down with her, who's one of the Metro counselors. And she would ask her a question, like, do you have diabetes? Yes. Do you have, she would just name it off a thing, and the answer was always yes. But then when she got to about problems, she'd be like, "Are you suicidal?" And she'd say, "No." She said things like, "Have you thought, about, your life not having purpose?" And she'd be like, "No." And she answered all the questions correctly. And after a few minutes of this, the counselor says, "You're lying." She starts just saying, "You're lying," after everything. And she turned around to the police officer and said, "She's taken this test before and knows the answer to keep me from recommending her be put on suicide watch. She needs to be put on suicide watch because she will not tell me the truth, and she knows how to manipulate this test. I have no choice but to go ahead and do it." And it also turned out that there was some other things going on. As far as other, she had some warrants out or something like that for her.
Oh my.
So there's a lot going on there. But the reason why I brought that up is she knew the exact words and phrases to pass the test, to manipulate others. And this lady was really good at manipulating people. And it was so sad because a lot of people knew she was good at manipulating, but they wanted her to leave that manipulative lifestyle.
Yeah.
Having a manipulative lifestyle is not a happy way to live. If your meaning is found in creating drama for other people, that is not happy.
Yeah.
Now, people will cling to that, but that is not happy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll let you respond to all that and just the whole deceptive humility here.
Well, I think, like you're saying, people cling to the stuff that ultimately hurts them because we've given into the ridiculousness of the phrase, the evil we know is better than the evil we don't know, which I just think is such a pansy answer to a lot of life's problems. We're just like, well, it's bad, but it could be worse. Yes, but it also could be better. Like, that's my response. And even jokingly, like, I think yesterday I burnt something on, I was cooking dinner for Justin and I burnt something. And Justin just jokingly went, it could be worse. And I was like, yes, but it also could be better. But in more serious situations, we do act like this. We cling to the terrible because to let go of the terrible is to let go of our own ability to control stuff. And that's why we see things like addiction and manipulation preserve throughout generations of people, and this poverty mentality, regardless of financial stability, move from parent to child and parent to child to parent to child, is because at least we know it. At least we have power, we have control, and we might be, rulers of the ash heap, but at least we're rulers of something. And so this continues, and it is so very destructive. And I thank God that there was a social worker there who saw not just what was on the piece of paper, the test in front of her, but saw the human being. Yep. And was like, okay, I've done this enough. I've done this long enough. I can begin to tell these signs, even if my diagnostic tool isn't working. And it's not that probably was a pretty okay diagnostic tool, but it wasn't enough.
Right.
And that's why you need people who are trained in this stuff, and you need compassionate people who also know how to create healthy boundaries. And I think it's a hard balancing act to have. It also only can happen well in community, because although this stranger, the social worker, had enough experience to see these signs, generally it takes a pastor, it takes a congregation, it takes people who know them long enough to say, okay, this is not normal. This is not just a situational chaos. This is a pattern of life where the individual has chosen for drama and chaos. And so now we need to intervene with something a little bit bigger than just our normal everyday tools. And it's, again, that takes time, that takes energy, that takes awareness. And it also takes sometimes us saying, not excommunicating people in the sense of you can never come back to church, but it is saying, hey, you're not healthy, you're hurting other people, and until you learn how to not hurt other people, you can't be in this environment in this specific way.
Right.
It doesn't, we might need to think of some other ways for you to engage in the life of the church, but you cannot just come up, rolling up here, heckling, yelling, verbally assaulting other people. Like, this is not permissible within the life of the church. And like Paul even says that, like, he, through many of his letters, he's like, God's grace may be free, but y'all can't be acting fools. Like, you've got to live into that grace. And the false humility thing, I think it's Benjamin Franklin. He wrote, he did a writing on the 7 virtues, or however many there are that he wrote about. And the last one was on humility. And he said that was the unachievable one, because we would even be prideful in our humility. Yeah. And I think often then, like we've talked about last week with the log in our own eye, we take that phrase to mean something very depressive. But the people who are concerned that they're prideful in their humility really aren't the ones that were concerned about being actually prideful in their humility.
Yeah. If you are seriously concerned about being prideful, you're probably not.
Yeah, you're probably doing okay. It is the people who look at the test, whatever the test is, the test of life, and go, I can manipulate this to my end. And those are the people are very dangerous, because they are often not just wrapped in sheep's clothing, they are often wrapped in shepherd's clothing.
Oh my goodness. When you said, how can I, take the test of life to my advantage, the first thing that came to my life is Caiaphas. So I don't know if you want to keep going.
Oh, no, that was my closing statement. You go on.
Okay. Caiaphas in the New Testament, man, there's so much to talk about. But Caiaphas in the New Testament, In John chapter 11, there's an interesting thing that happens amongst the Pharisees. They start debating whether or not, and this goes back even to John chapter, I think, 7, where Nicodemus actually takes up for Jesus and says, hey, we don't, condemn a man if we haven't tried them and found them guilty. We don't just do that. And they look over there and say, like, oh, he's from Galilee, and check the scriptures. No prophets come from Galilee, and you're from Galilee too, so get out of here. Yeah, the real reason they reject Jesus is because they are sinners. Not because of some like cultural norm or expectation that Jesus didn't meet. It's just because they're sinners. They're just degenerate reprobates. So, but the Pharisees among themselves, and you find this again amongst the Jewish ruling council. So you can talk about Sanhedrin, Sadducees, bring all this together. But among those, the leaders, the shepherds, they start thinking, is Jesus the Messiah? Nicodemus is a Pharisee. We make the Sadducees and Pharisees the villains. The only two men, I'll give a pass to John because Jesus tells him to take Mary home. But the only two men that are with Jesus when he is dead and take his body down are actually Pharisees and a member of the ruling council. You've got Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. But among them, among the Pharisees, they're having a debate, is Jesus the Messiah? Some of them are thinking he is, actually. And Caiaphas rolls in there, and there's all these Pharisees, and they say, why do we even care if he's the Messiah? We have the police right now. It's not a kingly order that has the police. We're actually in control. The priesthood is in control. If the Messiah comes and all this war breaks out, say that happens, or say he's just a miracle worker, whatever. Say he just keeps talking, because again, we oftentimes read more into the text than what's actually there. But what's actually there is they say, who cares if he's the Messiah or even what that looks like? We got a nice gig going on with Rome. We are in charge. If Jesus goes on like this, Rome is going to step in and we're going to lose this nice arrangement we have. It is better for one man to die than a whole nation perish. And what's funny is Caiaphas has already, the scripture is clear on this, Caiaphas was revealed that Jesus was going to die and that all the peoples of the earth would have an opportunity to come together. You might read that as the Jewish diaspora coming together, Jews and Gentiles. You can read that a couple of ways because it's actually true in both ways. But Caiaphas knows Jesus is actually going to die and it's going to unite people. Now, he could look at that and say, Jesus is the Messiah. He could look at that in a way like if you can imagine Jonathan and David. So Jonathan's good friends with David. If Jonathan found out a prophecy that David is going to become king and he's going to die for the nation of Israel and he's going to unite the 12 tribes. Because, David does unite the 12 tribes. He's not going to think, I need to kill David tonight. He's going to think that he's going to grow into a great man, and this is going to happen in an epic battle that I can't even imagine, but there's going to be, the armies of the earth. It's going to look like the Lord of the Rings. He's not going to think, I need to go kill him right now. The prophecy said, David dies and the tribes are united. I need to be the one to kill him right now. When Caiaphas turns around and says, let's us kill Jesus, he has been told that Jesus is going to unite people. And he, not out of service to that prophecy, but out of sinful spite, says, how can I take the test of life, as you called it, Amanda? I think that's actually a great phrase. I'm going to steal that. Okay. Or I hear offering, to use your language, test of life. Caiaphas thinks to himself, how can I use the test of life to my advantage? Jewish nation rot. We got a nice arrangement with Rome. We in charge. We got our police in charge. Sure, they may come and put their money in the temple treasury, and we don't have to pray to Caesar. We don't have to do any of the Pax Deorum, Pax Romana. We don't got to do anything. We can practice the Jewish law. We can actually practice the Jewish law without the Messiah or God. We got a nice thing going on here. We got a nice idol. It's better that the Messiah, the plan of God, be killed than we lose our nice little grift. And I hate to say that. I'm not here just to beat up on Caiaphas. I ain't the judge of the living and the dead, but that's biblically what happens. But that's what a lot of times people who have the poverty mentality that in the shepherd role will do. They will say, I've been given this opportunity. How do I use this to my end? I don't know if you want to respond to that, but oh man, it's nasty.
It is nasty. It's devastating, especially as shepherds, as we sit in this room and talk about this. Like, I I have met some very wonderful ministers, and I may not agree with them all the time, and we might have some personality conflicts, but overall, they love Jesus, they love their congregations, and they're good. And then I've met pastors, and I do think they are, although they are probably the loudest, they are the minority, but pastors that you can tell almost, not instantly, but pretty quickly, like, you are here for all the wrong reasons. Like, how did you get through our vetting system? And some of the answer to that is we need a better vetting system, but that's not today's conversation. But you wonder about these things. And I think to also what Pastor Dylan has said in some earlier comments, we do not say this to disparage the church, but to also pull up a mirror in front of ourselves and to think critically how we lead our congregations and our people and how we help those around us. Because the temptation is very much there. And although, yes, Caiaphas does have some very nefarious, I'm sure there were other people in that Sanhedrin, other people who were Pharisees, who they weren't quite as selfish, but they really were vitally concerned with how do we live if we're not on top? Like, even if we strip down the selfishness of wanting power, but if they're thinking, how does my family... Yeah, how does my family survive? How does the market survive? How do people move from day to day if they do not have us to protect them? They could be very noble in our pursuit of power, right? We'd be like, well, but we're protecting people, we're protecting our nation. This is good and right and true because we're helping people. And they miss it. And what is so also phenomenal, because this is John's gospel, so we think this is one of this is the last gospel that's written. It's probably one of, even towards the end of our New Testament books that are written. The fall of Jerusalem probably has already happened, right? Or this is very near that time. So the people are looking around, right? When they are first hearing of John's gospel, as John's gospel is being told and retold and read and written and spread out through the known world, they know what happened in Jerusalem. That now there is no temple. Right. Now there is not really a Sanhedrin. The Pharisees as rabbis in your local temple do have more power now, but even they're struggling with what it means for their, now that, the diaspora, the exile, we had no king, we had no temple, we had no land, and now we're experiencing it all over again generations later. And John writes to them and says, see? That mentality didn't work.
It didn't work. It never works.
This living into a myth of scarcity, or the poverty mentality, whatever you want to call it, when you live into this idea that you have little and therefore you have to protect little, you miss it. To go into another hymn, I think last week I had several hymns, but what little is much when God is in it? All that little you have, God asks for a mustard seed to become something great. God asks for a step of faith, not a whole 12-step plan. And when we protect the little we have, we end up having less.
Yes.
But when we give away the little, when we are free with the little, we actually find we have abundance. Not just enough, but abundance, life. And then this is all in response to the resurrection of Lazarus. This is what I find phenomenal. Jesus literally in front of their faces says, I have life and life abundant. And they're like, nope, we have this much. We need to protect this much, because if we don't protect this much, we'll have nothing. Jesus just literally showed the power over life and death over their heads.
Again, this actually think goes to the problem that we have with comfort and nostalgia. And even our obsession with methodology. A lot of times we work out a really good method, and this is an illustration I use all the time. We work out a method that works great in fall. And when wintertime comes, we refuse to acknowledge that it is wintertime. And you lose everything in doing that. We've got a system that worked. And even within like legitimate means, people have diagnosed the different stages of the collapse of American culture. I even hear a lot of people who talk about consumerism and the problems of that. The church has had serious problems with consumerism. It's corrupted some of the ways we do music. It's broken into our lives. It's robbed us of a lot of meaning. This is one of the ways we've gotten to the place where people think that, life is in watching television. But at the same time, we're beyond that. We're now to the point where a lot of young people, they don't even want to have a car. They don't want to learn to drive. They don't even want those consumer materialistic items, because we're now to the point of consuming ideas and images and things online. And the consumerism is no longer just a material thing, but it's down that. And I bring that up because we've got to understand that it's just not about the physical material items. We've got to understand where we're at today, because the disease is more advanced than that. When you go to the doctor and say they suspect you have cancer, a year later there's a tumor. You don't want them to keep saying, well, we need to keep an eye on that because that might metastasize into something. No, the tumor is here. We got to do surgery, okay? You have to acknowledge where you're at. You may have had a great methodology for diagnosing, precancerous states of various ailments. You may be really good at diagnosing precancer. But when the cancer's there, the precancer stuff isn't going to work anymore. You got to understand where you're at. And that's a big problem with what's going on with the Pharisees, is maybe they did work out a way that could somehow keep the Jewish nation alive while it was subjugated to Rome. This is also a problem that happens with people in age. I'm now 30. I don't even want a new cell phone because I don't want to bother with taking stuff over. When I was, just a few years younger, I thought it was cool. Like, oh, there's a new operating system out. I like the way the stuff looks. Now I'm like, don't. Do not come out with Windows 11. I do not want to see another version of Android. I don't even want to get another Android phone that's exactly like mine. Just leave it alone. And again, I'm 30. Maybe I am a 50-year-old in a 30-year-old's body. But the purpose of this point is, if you're a Pharisee who's lived your whole life and you've got this system worked up, you don't want to bother with getting a new system. You don't want to admit that the methodology you had is not actually salvific. It's not a method of salvation. It was a tool. It was a great shovel that worked in a nice sandy ground. You're now on a piece of limestone. A shovel is not a good tool anymore. Go get something else. Maybe it's a pick. Maybe it's a dynamite. I don't know. But the shovel ain't going to cut it. And we take things that are methodologies. Again, going back to the very first program we did, we take things that are mediums and we make them the primary expression. We take lesser things and make them the first thing. And that's how you get stuck in the poverty mentality. And it's also how you take elements of you that are in good faith, because when you see how the Pharisee tradition comes out of the exile, I think there was actually a lot of good faith. We're going to build little synagogues. We don't have a temple. People can't come to the temple. Even when we rebuild the temple, people can't come to it because they're all over the place. So we're going to make little mini temples with a little rabbi in there. And, there's always the competition between the established, Sadducees and kind of the non-establishment Pharisees. Like, you've always got those things. And a lot of times they are created in good faith. You actually designed the shovel in good faith when you had a sandy, yard. It's bad faith to insist that it will work on the limestone. It's bad faith to say this great system we put together in the exile is actually more important than the Messiah now. I've just come unhinged myself over here.
No, but I think this is the difficult work of the church, or the life of the people of God. We'll expand it beyond the church. Because we're talking about Sadducees and Pharisees and all this. Like these
tying back into the
these are the people of God. And they have time and time again struggled with this, and we struggle with this. What's a methodology? What's a tool? What's a primary expression? What's real? What needs to change? What doesn't need to change? How can we? And John Wesley said was in the non-essentials liberty, and the essentials unity, but in all things charity.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right? And we're like, okay, yeah, we've got a paradigm, right? If it's not important, don't worry about it. If it's important, worry about it. But we don't have a way of always deciding what's important and what's not important. So the church is always going to argue over these things. People, God, listen, human beings, creation. We'll include plants and animals on this one. We're always going to be toiling with what it means. Actually, no, we won't include plants and animals, because even a freaking weed knows when it's got to change how it grows when it's in concrete versus soil. It adapts. And believe it or not, human beings, one of the reasons we've made it to the top of the food chain is our adaptability. Although we often try to make choices that disprove that point, overall, we're adaptable creatures. So we have to continue arguing this. We do have to continue fighting with it. But moving back to this poverty mentality, the myth of scarcity, we have to begin to look at ourselves more honestly And it's not easy thing to do. I think we talked about this last week, or it may have been 2 weeks ago. I can't recall. But the uncomfortability of discipline. And maybe we have a bad paradigm of what discipline really is, but if we get a better idea of what discipline really does to us, it's still going to be uncomfortable. Listen, I don't want to exercise. My doctor told me I need to exercise 5 days a week. I thought that it used to be 3 is what they recommended. Now they've moved it up to 5. I don't want to do that. I don't want to eat. Well, I actually don't have a problem with vegetables, but I don't know. I really would rather eat ice cream every day. This is discipline. It's not always going to be ridiculously hard things, but it is going to be uncomfortable sometimes. But we do have to see why we're doing it. And sometimes we do come out of these things back to our first point with such good intentions. We're like, I'm the preacher, or I'm the whatever. I know what I'm doing. I've got to get this done. And we don't realize we've just steamrolled people. And we got to get back to what it means to be the people of God, what it means to live in community with one another.
I want to go to Hebrews 12, and we'll wrap kind of the program up here.
Okay.
I don't think we have time to get through anymore. Pastor Mike put together a really good list. I mean, if we can only get through 3 of 11, there's obviously a lot to talk about here. So this actually needs to be explored really in depth. But Hebrews 12, beginning in verse 7, it says, If you endure chastening, God is dealing with you as sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? And if you go back a verse to verse 6, it says, For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. Scourge. So what this is saying, of course, this is the King James English, and I love it. Even if you change the THs to S's so that they sound more modern. God scourges every son whom he receives. Meaning, the discipline is actually an act of love, and we so often miss that. We've missed that point in the modern world. Going down to verse 11, no chastening, meaning no discipline for the present, seems to be joyous, but rather grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. In other words, actually going through it is not going to be pleasant at the time. It's not going to seem fun. It's going to seem grievous. But nonetheless, afterwards it brings the fruit of righteousness, and it will ultimately, in the end, bring that meaning and the joy. So earlier you're talking about the John Wesley quote, and I want to get that right. I think it's, or no, this is from the Nazarene tradition. There's the whole state. I think it's Brzee. I think it's Brzee.
I think you're right.
But the whole idea of with essentials unity, non-essentials liberty, and all things charity. Mm-hmm. It turns into a tongue twister. I think that's right.
I think that's right.
Anyways, I wanted to straighten my own mind on that because
you're right. I do believe that was Brzee.
Yeah. Anyways, so as we look through this poverty of the soul, really, I think one of the best places to leave is actually Matthew 7. Come full circle. We do all have a log in our own eye. When I talk about real stories with real people, it's not because I'm better than that. It's because I'm one of them. We've bought one of the lies. See, the devil has figured out how to handle Christians. And one of the ways that he does that is to depress them when they should be stimulated. When we read the woman who is caught in adultery, we tend to read that as a depressant as well and say, oh, well, we can't now talk about sin. Jesus actually talks about this. He never disregards the sin. The sin is never told that it's good. The problem is that the people there are insincere. They're not actually there to become something better. They're here to, one, entrap Jesus. Mm-hmm. Trying to entrap God is not a sincere thing to do. So foundational premise of this one, they bring this woman to Jesus as an attempt to trap Jesus. They're attempting to trap God. Okay? So whether it's involving a woman here or it's involving some technicality about the Sabbath, the fact that you come, this is why Jesus calls them hypocrites. Hypocrisy at its core does not mean double standards. God has double standards when it comes to what is righteous and what is wicked. The wicked things go into a lake of fire. The righteous things come into eternity. Okay? In and of itself, double standards may not be a bad thing. And you can also argue that's not really double standards. That's just using the metric of Christ. But whatever. We'll set the linguistics aside. The root of hypocrisy is insincerity. That when you came to me and asked me about the Sabbath, you weren't really caring about the Sabbath. When you brought me this woman here, you didn't care about this woman. You didn't care about her sins. You're here to trap God. When Jesus doesn't respond when he's being interviewed before the cross, whether it be Pilate, the high priest, one of the reasons, well, I would actually say what I see is the big reason Jesus does not respond to them is they're not sincere. They don't care what is true. Pilate's just going to wash his hands of it anyway. If Jesus sat down with these people and explained to them the full depth of heaven, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't care. They're not here to be reasoned with. They're here to put him to death. The priests have already decided, even if he is the Messiah, we like what we have going on better than that. They don't care. They're not sincere. They're not worth your time to reason with because they won't hear it anyway. We have a log in our eye. The story with the woman caught in adultery, that's supposed to encourage us to go and sin no more, which what that means is, because we are sinners, we go and sin no more. We tend to think that we just be depressed by that story, just like we think we should be depressed by Matthew 7. It's because you have a log in your eye that you get it out, and then you go help your neighbor. Yeah. You're supposed to do that. Get your life together with Jesus. It's because we are sinners that we must preach against sin. It's not from an impulse of condemnation, but it's out of a mercy that says this is miserable. It's out of a love that says, let's all get out of the deep miry clay. And we'll sing the song, he brought me out of the deep miry clay. You're supposed to walk away from, whether it be the story of the woman caught in adultery, even whether it be Jesus healing people and he says, do you want to be healed? We're supposed to walk away from that and say, you know what? I have been clinging on to unhappy things. I have been resisting maturity because I like the shovel I built for fall and I refuse to need a pick to break the ice of winter. I'm holding on to something I shouldn't hold on to. And I don't want to mature. And what's sad is that actually dishonors the past. You may have been the greatest tool maker when you made that shovel for fall time. By clinging to it in wintertime when you need a pick to break the ice, I know I'm changing my metaphor a little bit, you're actually dishonoring the wisdom you had in fall.
Yeah.
If you want to honor who you were in the past, you want to honor the nostalgia, sometimes that means letting it go. It's now wintertime. I need a pick. I don't need that anymore. So that's my final thought. We're over an hour. Amanda, any final thoughts?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. And wait, we only got through 3 out of 11?
We only got through 3 out of 11.
Well, very good.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. This is Kingdom of the Logos. God love you and have a blessed day.